Good afternoon. I just wanted to share some thoughts with you. Kind of ties into what I shared with you this morning, and although I haven't shared it yet, anyway. But in verse 5 or verse 6, what we're going to look at today, where it says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." Now, there's a parable there that we're not going to have time to look at today that really reminded me of that thought, and I think it's so applicable for us today and in the U.S. in the focus of we as believers being on so many different things, and that's just so easy to happen. And so I just want to look at this very briefly. This parable in Luke chapter 12, where it says, "Someone in the crowd said to him, 'Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me.' But he said to him, 'Man, who made me a judge or arbiter over you?' And he said to them, 'Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions.' And he told them a parable, saying, 'The land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grains and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" So I think we can all imagine this scene pretty easily. Where we have this crowd of people around Jesus, and somebody shouts from the back or from the crowd somewhere, "Hey, my brother's not being fair with me with my inheritance. Christ, you want everyone to be just. Make him be just." And I think we can associate with that. Unfortunately, when a loved one dies, sometimes there's a lot of angst, a lot of fighting, a lot of bad stuff that happens when someone passes away and has something to leave. Um, and that shouldn't be the way it is, by the way. Christ doesn't address that here. Um, but he does address the idea, and I guess he does kind of address the idea of covetousness. And first off, by the way, I think it's interesting that he said, "Who made me to be an arbiter of you and your possessions?" Uh, what's interesting is that Christ will be the judge of something far greater, or God will, and that's our very souls. Christ will be the one that argues for the believer that we have been redeemed by his sacrifice, and that's just such a tremendous thought. But we see here that this person comes to Christ and argues that Christ should help him out and make his brother do the right thing, and um, it is interesting that, generally speaking, when these things happen during this time, that the dispute will end up at the feet of the scribes or the lawyers or some other rabbis. And so this would be, fitting that this man would bring it to another rabbi, another teacher that he respected a lot. So in actually doing this, he's showing a lot of respect to Christ, even though his thinking is a little bit off. But Christ doesn't deal with the issue of judging between them. Instead, he deals with the root issue, which is covetousness, which is laying up for ourselves treasure in the wrong spot. And that's what I want to think about, and how that relates to blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. That's how those tie together. And so Christ deals with this, the attitude of loving our neighbor as ourselves, as we've talked about in the past many, many times. You all are familiar with that thought. That is not consistent with covetousness. If we have that, the desire to have a desire to have everything that everyone else has, a desire, really, it's a greed. If that's stronger than our desire to love others, we've got a problem. Now, think in your own life, thinking about everything that's surrounding you. How easy is it for that to creep in to our lives? And so Christ says, "Hey, beware of covetousness. This is the root problem here is covetousness." He tells them why, and notice what he says. Um, Be on guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. One's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And folks, that's such an important point. Um, it's a truth. It's just a tremendous truth here that needs to be yelled from the housetops. And this is something that Christ will continue to talk about after this parable throughout the rest of this chapter, and again, that we have to be building up for the kingdom of God, not for our own kingdom here. And it's so easy to lose sight of that. And so Christ shares this parable, a simple parable. A guy has a lot of stuff, and he says, I'm out of space to store my stuff, and I better build bigger ones. And so I have more to store, and I can be happier then if I have more stuff. All right, that's Bob's paraphrase. Now, let me address a few things that this parable is not teaching. All right, this parable is not teaching that believers can't own anything. There are religions that require that. There are religions that kind of the more destitute you are, the more virtuous you are. When we read the book of Proverbs, you see the foolishness of that thought. The reality is that the book of Proverbs tells us again and again that we should have stored up for ourselves and for our families, to care for them, to be able to provide for them. We're told in the New Testament that if we don't provide for our families, we are worse than an unbeliever. And so we have to be careful to not put this in a spot it's not supposed to go, and try to elevate this thought of I can't have any possessions, that I'm keeping everything I have I must use right now. That's not the point. And it's also not the point that a believer that has wealth or has belongings isn't pleasing to God. That's not the point either. Matter of fact, we see throughout the apostles' ministries that they are actually provided for by people that have, and they're commended for that. So what is the point then? What is Christ's point? Well, notice how this ends. So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. If your desire is on those temporal things and collecting those temporal things, and that's all that's important to you, and you have no desire to, as we talked about this morning, the idea of hungering and thirsting for righteousness, if that's our thought, that's where we're wrong. If we keep our focus on kingdom building, if we keep our focus on living towards for that kingdom, living for eternity, being rich towards God, hungering and thirsting for righteousness, not the next $1 million, then we have ourselves in the right place. The problem is that many times we as believers can get caught up in the things of the world. We can lose our focus and lose track of where we are what we're supposed to be striving for. And so that's his parable here. This land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, what shall I do, for I have nowhere to store my crops? This isn't saying, farmers, you can't build another bin. That's not what it's talking about. But instead, this is really is talking about focusing on the wrong things. Having our drive be for the wrong things, not truly hungering and thirsting for righteousness. Folks, the reality is that we will never, if our focus is on those temporal things, on filling our barns, so to speak, we won't ever be satisfied. You'll never have enough. That's the reality. That's what we see in Scripture. That's what we see even right here. This farmer, when he would get done building the larger ones, storing all of his grains and goods, when we come to verse 19, we know that's not what he's going to say. I will say to my soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Generally speaking, someone that does that loses their way very quickly, and they become not satisfied. So we as believers have to be careful of what we're storing up for. Are you storing up for right now, or are you storing up for eternity? And that changes our whole motive behind what we're doing. That changes how we interact with other people. That changes how we go to our job every day. That changes all of that. Is our work, what we try to accomplish a means to build bigger barns and lay up for ourselves and be able to rest and be merry and be happy and not think about anything else? Or is it to please our great God? And that's something that, I can't answer for you. It's something that you will have to really kind of figure out for yourselves of what it is that you are striving for. What are you laying up treasure for? In the next part of this passage, Christ goes on to talk about don't fret over everything around you. Don't be anxious about your life, he says in verse 23. So, and then he talks about all nature, how everything is clothed just how it needs to be, and there's no thought for it because God takes care of it. Folks, it takes faith that we can live that way. But that is how we should live. We should be content with what we have. We should not focus on this world, but instead, our focus must be on eternity, on kingdom building. And so I want you to think about that. I want you to think about today of where it is that your life has turned into maybe a greed-filled, covetous lifestyle that you don't like, that doesn't line up with what we just talked about. Maybe you don't have wealth right now, but that's what you worry about. That's what your focus is. I don't know where you might be this afternoon. But I want you to think about, if you have wealth, if you have more than you need, the first consideration shouldn't be, hey, I need a bigger barn. I need more. But instead, it should be towards God, who gave you the ability to get the wealth, and towards others, showing that you believe in that principle of loving your neighbor as yourself. So don't allow your wealth to get in the way of serving God. Don't allow wealth get in the way of, or the passion for wealth to get in the way of loving others. Don't let it control who you are. In our society, it's very easy to happen. We've got to be careful. If you're a worrier about material things, understand that God's going to take care of your needs. He's promised to. As we are faithful for doing what we're supposed to do, as we are serving Him, following His word, He'll provide. And all of us, I don't care where you are and how much wealth you have or whatever else, all of us need to be building wealth for eternity. What are you doing to be rich towards God? Are you searching after righteousness? Are you searching after His kingdom? That's when you'll truly find satisfaction. That's when you'll find that rest that farmer thought he would find by having bigger barns. All right, so I encourage you that with today. Think about that, contemplate those thoughts, and I hope you'll wrap all that up with what we talked about this morning and continue to have that desire to live for him and for his kingdom. You all have a great week.